Hi, this is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. So, on one of our last live shows, I guess the one before the last one, we talked about the Fae. And we talked about the idea of me making a video to cover some of what I perceive as misinformation about working with them and the superstitions that are surrounding them. So, they didn't start really writing down stories about the Fae until the 1200s or so. That's when it became popular to start documenting the myths and stories around them. But Christianity came into Ireland in 431 or so AD. So Christian church, Catholicism in particular, had been around for 700-800 years or so before the stories started to be documented. My belief is that most of the supposed information we have about the Fae, how they work, what they do, what they like, what they don't like, comes from that perspective of the Catholic Church. One of the earlier things that was said about the Fae, not everyone said it, but a lot of sources did, was that they were fallen angels. Now we know that in Christianity, fallen angels are associated with demons, the devil, and that kind of thing. And so I think that the core of most of those stories come from that perspective, from the idea that you're dealing with beings that are trying to trick you, trying to take something from you, steal something from you, your immortal soul, or whatever, finding ways in which to undermine your good values and that kind of thing. So, looking at the stories from that perspective, I think gives us at least a chance of unwinding some of that stuff. And certainly other aspects of that had to do with the normal kinds of superstition, not knowing how diseases work or how genetics work, how different mental states work, and that kind of stuff, and trying to explain away the things that you couldn't understand. So one of the things that people say is that you should never tell a fae your name, and that by telling them your name, they gain power over you. I really don't see that as a problem, since the names that we're using are names that have been given to us or that we've given to ourselves. And it's not like your name is your true name, your nature, and that kind of thing, which is the way that aspect of magic works. Knowing the true name of something gives you power over it in the sense that it imbues to you knowledge and understanding of the substance and the totality of what it is that you're naming. And that is power. Understanding and knowledge is power. So I'm not sure if that relates to the Christian thing or not. I haven't really discovered any particular research on that aspect specifically at this point, although if I delved into some of the websites that are run by the churches warning people away from the Fae, I might come across something like that. But the idea is that if the Fae are fallen angels or demons, anything they do to try and trick you is an attempt to trick you into giving up something, and giving your name would be giving up something. And by giving up something, then you end up owing something, or they have an advantage over you, or that kind of thing. So, I don't worry about that in any way whatsoever. I've never had that come up with the ones that I've worked with. We just know who each other are. Names actually don't really come into it most of the time. although on occasion I do get a name from them. So, and along the same lines is the never accepting a gift from a fae. And if you accept a gift from them, you're making a contract with them. This, I'm certain, relates back to that Christian mythos thing, the idea that in their mythology, the devil is always trying to trick people into doing something that's going to make them lose their soul or their place in heaven or whatever, commit some kind of a crime or a sin that will give them an advantage in this war between good and evil. So the idea of giving something over to a being is you're making a connection with them, and if you accept that gift, then you're accepting that connection. I think this has no validity either in the pagan community. If you're a Christian witch, I don't know what you might think about this, because every Christian is going to be different as far as how they interpret these things. But from a specifically pagan perspective, accepting a gift from a being is not making a contract with them or making a pact with them. It could mean that it would be nice for you to give them something back, because that's what friends do. And if you accept a gift from them without strings attached, then, that's that. And I've noticed in a lot of the sites, conversations and stuff about them, that this comes up quite a bit. The idea that you should never accept anything from them. And what I hear from the Fae, as it were, is a lot of confusion and disappointment, because some of these gifts are pretty special. I mean, people have talked about finding something laid out on their bed. I mean, this takes a huge amount of effort and energy on the part of a spirit being to be able to manifest something physically for you, and then to reject it, not touch it, not thank them for it, bury it, get rid of it, throw it away. It's sort of a slap in the face, and that's much more likely to cause offense than saying thank you, which is the other thing. Like, you're not supposed to say thank you, because then they're offended. They're not easily offended. Where that comes from, I have no clue. Why there's all these authors that think that they're easily offended. They're their own beings. They coexist with us, and they have their own culture, and they have their own jobs and their own things that are important to them. There's no doubt about that. The other world that they exist in is sort of like a parallel dimension. We don't often interact with them at this point, but they seem to be becoming more active in our plane and are more willing to start reaching out to people. Historically, even with Christianity and so forth, witches have always had a special relationship with the Fae and can work with them without those particular concerns and harm. So I think a lot of those warnings were more for the average person and the church trying to keep them from interacting with a power that wasn't theirs, because that undermines their authority. So, like, if you, end up having an encounter with a fairy, and they do something nice for you, and then the church tells you that they're devils and demons, and that's kind of confusing, they might lose your attention or make you question the reality that they're trying to sell. And that's the thing to remember, is that most of the information that we have at this point about them is based on these stories that were written down long after Christianity came on the scene, and by people who were members of the religion. Somebody recently posted a bunch of stuff on my video, the first one I ever did on the Fae, talking about them being fallen angels and so forth. And was, one of the things that they said as evidence that these stories are true is that the most common thing a fairy said to a person was, can I be saved? Which is absurd, because they don't need saving. They exist beyond and outside of all of that stuff. So yeah, it's interesting. And if we're not willing to look at these things and realize that primitive people or, um, rural people who are being influenced by churches and so forth, and superstition, and don't have much science around to understand how things work, are going to be more susceptible to these kinds of superstitions. And certainly, there's a lot of things that we used to know were true that we now know were not the way we thought they were. The idea that our ideas and the things we've written down and our experiences are completely infallible is in itself a fallacy, because we have our limitations when it comes to how we perceive things. Some of us have more of an ability to perceive things than others, and all that stuff. So I think it's important to keep an open mind, and you can work with the Fae, but they're not going to work for you. And certainly, like in any relationship, if you are asking them for assistance and you're getting it, then it's just a correct way of being to give assistance when you can. And that's how I work with them. It's like, I don't help them with the expectation that they're going to do something for me, but if there's something that I can do to help their kingdom, like when I healed that ley line and they all appeared and were flocking around me and talking and asking me questions and so forth. Anytime I can help set something right in the natural world, close a portal that's causing trouble, just whatever it happens to be, they notice that I'm just out there trying to help out. And then if I have something I think they might be able to help with, I ask them if they will, but I don't demand it. It's a request. And if it's not something they're interested in doing or willing to do or able to do, then that's perfectly fine. There's no expectation to have that. So one of the big things, several of the big things, but one of the big things is the idea of the changeling, that one of the people were very afraid of the fairies because they stole their children and put like a changeling in their place. And that actually has happened fairly recently. There was a man who actually killed his wife because he believed that she was a changeling and would not be convinced otherwise, and ended up murdering her in order to prove himself correct. And that's insane. So when a notion takes you down a path like that, where you are more likely to do something illegal, to say the least, immoral, unethical, insane, hopefully you figure that out before you get there, and stop along that line of thinking, because that's just crazy. But in the olden days, it's like, if a child was born and the child was weak, there was something wrong with them, they weren't thriving, it would be, I guess, in some ways, a better option, psychologically speaking, to believe that it wasn't your own child. So when the child died, then it was because, your child was still out there somewhere, even though you were never going to see them again. But it was the fairies that did it. And so they got blamed for all of those deaths, I'm sure. And the same with other things, like, witches and fairies both were in the category of souring milk and herding cows and things, which makes no sense because they're a part of nature and fairies are a part of nature. And although nature can be cruel, it not cruel in the sense a human can be cruel, but like violent and deadly. It's not capricious. And that just sounds like, capriciousness to me. So, that's another one of those things that they decided. And of course, because of that association, this is the reason why it's believed that they like milk as a gift, milk and honey. Although that seems to be true, I'm not sure if they've just agreed that they will accept that as an offering from us because, we're mentally, I don't know, limited in our ability to comprehend and understand their needs. And they see it as like a gift and a gracious attempt to make amends or to be polite or whatever, or, just to be nice or not, I don't know. But it seems to work as far as giving them an offering is concerned, and asking them, because all magic and relationships are an exchange of energy on every level, no matter how small or large the relationship is. There's always some kind of an exchange. Whether it always goes in the same direction or not, that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of times when energy might come in from one place and then I will send that energy on to another, and but it's still moving the energy and not, harboring it, but it's still exchanging that energy going forward or whatever. So the idea that they were dangerous definitely relates to the Christianity thing, and that they could steal you and you would end up in their realm and never be able to find your way back because you ate their food when you were over there, which harkens back to Persephone, and the underworld thing, which I find interesting that seems to be some kind of a correlation there, that eating food in another dimension is bad because then it connects you directly to that plane of existence or something, and you may not be able to get out. But historically, witches were able to go back and forth between their dimension and ours without any harm, and without special preparation necessarily. Uh, it's just like, yeah, there is a historically special relationship between fairies, elves, whatever, and witches. Not all humans, just the witches. So it's kind of an interesting notion. Um, so the thing about iron, that iron harms them and they don't like it, that comes from the Sidhe, and in Ireland, where the Sidhe once walked on the land, and they were people, and everyone could see them. They're human-sized people. They turned into later the gods and goddesses of Ireland, but initially they were rulers, kings and queens, and people and so forth that lived on the land. And there was a battle, a war between them and the human inhabitants. And there was a treaty that was signed, and they agreed to give the humans half the land, and the humans tricked them and said the half that the Sidhe got were under the ground. And so then they became dwellers under the earth and in the mounds and so forth, and their place of residence became underground, of course, which really dovetailed nicely with the Christian Satan, devil, fallen angel, hell being under the earth kind of thing. And so, it was a nice little thing there. Uh, so the iron was the weapons that the invading force of the humans used in order to kill them off and force them underground. I don't really think that they have a problem with iron. I don't think iron is any kind of protection against the fairies. Although if somebody believes that it is and is using it that way, it probably would work, and they would know this human doesn't like us and they want us to go away and would avoid you. But I don't think that it's like an inherent to their nature that they avoid iron at all costs, because they are earth beings and there's iron all everywhere. It's just, all throughout the ground. Iron is a pretty common mineral throughout Europe and so forth. So, yeah. So I think that that is probably not an accurate assessment of them. I'm trying to think of, there's some other ones that popped up into my mind earlier. There's a lot written about how the fairies are not like Tinkerbell. That's one of the common headlines. Not like Tinkerbell. But that's not true either, because I've seen the ones that are like Tinkerbell, and they're pretty cute and beautiful and little and about the size of a dragonfly. I think that there's all different sizes and shapes of fae, and they have different kinds of jobs. Some of them have year-round activities that they're in charge of. Some of them have seasonal things that they deal with. So it depends on what they are, and they don't seem to be limited to a place anymore. It's like they followed immigrations. When immigrants came to this country, a lot of their folk tales came with them, and the spirits and beings that were they're familiar with seem to come with them as well. So there's a whole mix of potential encounters that you can have. The fact that some aren't nice is probably true, but then again, the dark and the light is a human conception, and good and evil kind of thing is still really harkens back to that whole this is the only way reality works. There has to be always like a side against another side and a battle between these two forces. So, it's perception. Something may seem bad to you, but then still be good for the overall environment, or, for the earth, or a situation you're not aware of that has nothing to do with you. We're very egocentric, and so we think everything is about us, but it isn't. Sometimes it has nothing to do with us, and it just happens to be this is what's going on, and we just got in the way and didn't like it and decided that it was personal and yelled at them. So if you're going to work with these beings, first of all, of course, it's always a good idea to be polite, in my opinion, and respectful of their space, and to not make unreasonable demands upon them, because it's not it's the old grimoires in Europe was all about like forcing things to do your bidding. That was their whole thing. They were like, I'm gonna call you into this triangle, and if you don't do what I tell you to, I'm gonna make you go to hell, and you're gonna be sorry. And having a relation that's not a relationship, that's like a domination over another form of existence, which always ends badly, because it's a funny thing. People, not just people, everything doesn't like to be constantly told what to do and to be threatened with dire consequences should they not comply. It's just not a very good workable scenario. And so that was like pretty much the common attitude towards these things, was to yell and control and so forth. Is not a good idea. And to try and keep an open mind, because there are probably more kinds of fae out there than we have any idea. In fact, I met one a few nights ago I have never encountered before, and I've encountered a fair number of them. And I don't know if it's going to come back for me to get acquainted better. It may have been a one-time only visitation, but it definitely did not look like any other kind of fae I've ever seen. And it was interesting and surprising. So having an open mind and not judging the fairies and the fae folk or the she or whatever by our human perception of reality probably will help us in the long run to actually learn about who they are, what they are, and how the relationships between us and them can work to our mutual benefit. There's a thing about the fairy rings, which I thought was interesting. Of course, fairy ring is a specific type of mushroom. It's how it grows. It sort of clears out an area between, the mycelium is the mushroom body, and in that particular mushroom, the mycelium grows in a circle, and kills off an area of it cuts off, I guess, the oxygen supply for the other plants or something. And I guess not the oxygen supply, they don't use oxygen, but whatever it is that they need, cuts it off. And so it clears this area, and then the fruiting body are the mushrooms that come along the edge. And some of these fairy rings are pretty old and have been around for a long time, and so the mycelium is still there, and then the fruiting body moves out farther and farther away. So ancient cultures come across a place in a field where there's this perfect circle with all these little mushrooms around it. And what they come up with to explain this is that this is where the fairies dance. You shouldn't go in it. They're open portals. There's all kinds of stuff like that. And if you step inside one, it's bad. In reality, I'm sure there's nothing to that except for our associations with it. Because it is just another mushroom. And although mushrooms can do all kinds of interesting things to our state of mind and so forth, it doesn't mean that it's an actual fairy circle and that they're eating on the mushrooms. But apparently it does mean you should probably not touch the mushrooms because some of them are poisonous. I don't know which ones. They just said that in the article I read, that you have to be careful and probably not touch them. But that doesn't mean you can't stand inside of a fairy circle. I mean, again, it's like a natural thing that's happening that the people couldn't understand. They didn't know how it worked. They didn't know what mycelium was. They didn't know how mushrooms grew. They didn't know that there's a lot more to a mushroom than just the part that pops up that they can eat. And mycelium turns out to be so important to the whole planet, and a way for trees to communicate with each other. It's like it's a network of communication fibers that allow trees to talk to one another over great distances. And so, it is an interesting thing in and of itself. But, so that's the fairy ring. And I had somebody leave some kind of a message for me once that said that they dared me to find a fairy ring and get inside of it and see what happens. And I'm like, if I could find one, I would. But they don't seem to grow around here. I have to find somewhere else, find out where they grow. Maybe I'll come across one. And then I can jump in the middle and see what happens. And then I can go like, oh my God, you were right. It's just a terrible experience. I can't believe I was so stupid. Yeah, whatever. But I am definitely exploratory and experimental when it comes to things. I'm thinking that whatever whatever it is that we think that we know for sure because it was written down is probably the most likely misinformation that we have, and that we're continuing to promote it. I was very surprised when I started seeing all this stuff in the pagan groups and everything, and I'm like, I understand the Christians doing this because I knew that that's sort of where that got started, but I couldn't understand witches and pagans doing that because they're part of the invisible fabric of nature. It's like, and yeah, nature's not always nice. So, always be alert. But yeah, it's interesting. So if you're going to want to work with the Fae, you need to, make some decisions about how you're going to go about it. Are you going to be open-minded and make up your own mind? Are you going to believe the stories? If you're going to believe the stories, that they're easily offended, and that if you don't act completely correctly and they're offended, they're going to trick you and do things to you, etc. You probably shouldn't try to work with them at all, because you're setting yourself up, because you're coming with that attitude to them. And if you think about how their feelings might be, it's like, how would you feel if everybody thought you were mean and they listen to the gossip? I mean, how many times have we seen that happen, where people have started a gossip tree about somebody, and then it turns out they don't know anything about it, but the gossip has become a life of its own, and everyone who hears the gossip makes a judgment about the person before they meet them. Sometimes I'm sure that the gossip is accurate, but it's still better to make up your own mind, especially if you're going to walk a magical path. and, decide. So again, boundaries are important. So, if you're dealing with the Fae, and hey, they're sometimes like cats. They like to bat things around. They like to play with things. They seem to be attracted to things that sparkle. They like stones, crystals, glitter, shiny objects and so forth. And they might want to play with them. It's not malicious. It's just they're attracted to it, and they might move some stuff around. In my house, I have a rule about that. And so if something I suspect that they decided to go play with disappears, I make an announcement. I said, okay, guys, I'm going to leave the room, and I want you to put it back because I need that. So when I come back into the room, I want it to be in a place where it's easy for me to find. And most of the time, when I leave a room and I come back, it's where I've already looked, and it's just sitting right there. So, they listen, and they certainly are attracted to certain people. They seem to be attracted to me. I've had numerous people say that they see them around me a lot, like fluttering around my aura and so forth. And on occasion, they have come and tried to help me. When I was sick or something, I had a few of them come. They seem to be interested in checking me out. I'm not sure exactly why, but I think that's how I ended up seeing the one I've never seen before, because he was just there checking me out. Um, and I searched all over the place trying to find an image that matched what I saw, and I couldn't find anything. So I don't know. Either it just hasn't been written down, or I can't find the right place to look, or whatever, but I could not identify it, even with all the access we have to the internet and everything else. So, in any event, um, yeah. But like any relationship, it takes time to evolve and develop. And like I said, always pay attention. So I think it's a good jumping off spot, to kind of get started on another level of the conversation about working with them. Because if we can't, this is part of shadow work, looking at our own prejudices and so forth. So if we aren't willing or aren't able or not interested in looking at our own superstitions and prejudices and assumptions about reality to start with, then this is definitely not something you should be doing at all. You should not be working with the Fae, because they are powerful beings in their own right, and have their place. They're not human. There's no doubt about it, but they're also not fallen angels or devils, and they're not working for Satan, and they don't care anything about being saved. And all those stories were after the church arrived in Ireland. Propaganda. So I guess I'll leave it at that for now, and hopefully you guys are having an awesome week, and I'll see you on Sunday, and blessed be everybody. This is Siofra Bradigan, and this has been Siofra's Magic Alcove. Blessed be.